Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. Well, my guest today is, first of all, I have to say this first. She's a Cree carnivore. I love that so much. But she is also the CEO and founder at Raven Sinclair Consulting. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for the invite. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's so nice that you accepted. I just had to share that Cree carnivore thing because it just sounds so cool.
It's relatively new, but it
Okay.
works. And I've only done one video, but I'm always thinking about, oh, I got to share this and I got to share this and the other thing. So yeah.
Right. Okay. So now tell me about your consulting business.
Well, let's see, it's relatively new. I mean, excuse me, I took early retirement. I was a professor at of social work for going on 18 years.
Mhm.
And in that capacity, professors, we often take on sort of little side gigs here and there. And when I did take early retirement, I had a fairly large sort of grant to do some work with a friend, and then I had other, sorry, I've got cat hair on me. The
All right.
perils of owning cats. um, I had different projects here and there, and so I mean, I didn't really retire. I just switched into really sort of freelancing,
Yes.
and uh, yeah, I've just gone by Raven Sinclair Consulting, and I also have sort of two other names for training that I do for workshops and yeah, training. I used Tapwaywen training. Tapwaywen is Cree word for speaking the truth.
Okay. Okay.
And then Piggy Waywin, Piggy Waywin means coming home,
Mhm.
to come home. And so that's sort of, I call it Piggy Waywin Research Group, because there's a small group of people that I've worked with for a long time on, for the most part, on 60s scoop research.
Okay.
Yeah. And so in academia, I had hired some RAs, and they're just excellent researchers in their own right. And so I have sort of a team, and I'll partner with different ones here and there for different projects. And yeah, so yeah, I use different names.
All right.
Yeah.
What kind of workshops do you give?
Well, okay, I think that's the last cat hair there. Let me see. So recently, trauma informed approaches. So as a social work educator and clinician, I did a clinical master's at the University of Toronto. Um, I've been drawn into areas that are challenging for some reason. I think sometimes I look at it, it's like, we have these sort of origin stories around, we have our greater origin stories, but then we also have these stories around how we come to be living, in the context we're living in. And Sylvia McAdams, she has the story about that when we are with creation before we come here, we make agreements. We make agreements with all our relations with the spirits, even with Creator. Although Creator's a very loving and compassionate being, and we're given free will once we get here.
Right.
So despite our best agreements and commitments, sometimes they don't always pan out.
Mhm.
And so I guess one of the agreements I made was to be, born Cree, but adopted into a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family, to experience all kinds of terrible abuse in foster homes,
Right.
and some problematics within my adoptive family. Experienced racism sort of throughout my life, and it really set me apart. I grew up feeling really isolated, which most 60 scoopers do, unless they were adopted with twins or siblings. But I didn't see another Indigenous kid until I was in grade 11.
Wow.
Really, I mean, we drove across Canada once. So grew up in Ontario, even though I'm from a Plains Cree. We did drive across Canada once and stopped at the Blackfoot Reservation. I think it was Siksika, where there was a powwow, and we were walking around, and everybody was staring at us. And I thought they were going to steal me back, and so I went running back to the car and locked myself in,
Mm.
because by that time I had been fully acculturated and really didn't know anything about Indigenous people. Didn't
Yeah.
had been forced really to reject my own indigeneity as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant adoptee. And Yeah. So, I tend to digress when I talk, but so
All
there's
right,
always
no worries.
context there, right?
Yeah,
And so I experienced a lot of trauma and turmoil. And then when I was about in my early 20s, I had started university, but I was really in the depths of post-traumatic stress disorder.
right.
And so a friend of mine gave me a number for a therapist, and I started working with her, a Gestalt therapist in Toronto, who was really excellent. And that really started me on about a 10-year journey of my initial recovery, because it's a lifelong journey, I think,
Yeah,
of coming back to the self and coming back to who we are. And so this is in my early 20s. Now I'm 62. It took 30 years of pretty hard work. So I reconnected with my family at the age of 27
right.
or 26, and then moved out back out west when I was 27. So that's what, 30, like 5 years ago, 36 years ago. And it took me that long to reattach to my siblings. And it was about 6, 7 years ago that it's like, I love you again. Because I had to stop loving you in order to survive.
Yeah,
And my
absolutely.
sister said we had to stop loving you too, because it was too painful that you were gone.
Wow.
And all of that really informed my study. When I went to university, I wanted to find out, what does it mean to be a Cree person? What is it? Who are these Indigenous people? Because you don't learn anything in school. Even in university, I took Canadian history, thinking, aha, this is where I'm going to learn things about what it means to be Indigenous. And it, I think the third class was about 10 minutes,
Yeah,
maybe the second class about 10 minutes. And it really talked about sort of the migration primarily from east to west. They totally ignore the West Coast, right? And Vancouver coming in and being all brutal with West Coast people. Um, and then they talked about the treaties, the reserve system and the treaties and the Indian Act. And that was kind of it. And I thought, well, this is not what I'm looking for. And so I dropped that class, went into political science and medieval history, which was really interesting and very important in terms of my education, because it helped me to understand like the Western mindset
right.
in terms of their enlightenment period thinkers like Locke and Hobbes and Machiavelli and so on. And yeah, and then I took a degree in psychology, and then I was thinking, should I do a master's in psychology? And I remember looking at the lab at the University of Saskatchewan, thinking, this is just not for me. There's a not a good fit here. And so I really just sort of stumbled upon First Nations University, which was Saskatchewan Indian Federated College at that time. But I did my Bachelor of Indigenous Social Work, and then worked for a bit. Went to Toronto and did my master's, and then worked for another little bit, and then right into my PhD in 2001.
Mm,
But that whole period, I was learning about psychology. I was learning about post traumatic stress. I was learning about colonial history. Um, and intergenerational trauma, and I'm learning my own genealogy. I know my genealogy 10 generations back,
wow.
and there's a gap in my father's, but it actually goes back even more
Right.
generations on the Sinclair side. And so in the course of that, I started picking up, a lot of knowledge. And so people would ask me to come and talk on different topics, often, related to Indigenous child welfare and the 60s scoop. And then it sort of branched out from there into cross-cultural social work. And, so then I'd be with groups of social workers from an organization, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And it's like,
Yeah.
and it was kind of a perfect fit, because I had lived both sides. And so, and then from there, I started teaching communications training in social work. And I did it very experientially. So very different from what the generalist social work communication class is. That communication is how to do notes, how to interview someone. And my philosophy is that if you are going to work with human beings, then you need to know how to interact in a good way.
Right.
And so right from the start, I was having students, playing games together, interactive games together, and then really lots of activities were just engaging all the time. And now it's like I have students who are now colleagues, of course, and I've been told so many times that approach changed their life,
Wow.
because I got to witness students coming out of their shell. I got to witness students setting aside really bad, problematic and destructive behaviors that they had adopted as protection and defense. So it really branched from there. Because when you do communication training, if you do it in an experiential way rather than just as a cognitive exercise, then you need to learn how to have courageous conversations and move towards what we define as conflict, as opposed to move away. And in the process of learning how to do that, and then sharing that, word got out, and people started to call me to come in and do lateral violence intervention in communities with agencies. And I've had lots of calls and lots of cancellations too, because people are afraid of it. And so I've changed it from lateral violence intervention to effective organizational or group communication.
Right.
And that seems to that doesn't frighten people, because if you know that you're a big fat gossiper, and you're going to bring in somebody to address that as one of the issues around lateral violence, it's like, maybe we have other things to do that week.
Yeah, people don't like to look at themselves, do they?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just,
And now I've it always evolves, and it's a good thing, because we need to keep learning as we grow. And so I started to become curious about the physiology of trauma, and really started doing a lot of studying in the last year. And now I talk about, so how does trauma affect the brain, first of all, and then the relationship to the body,
okay.
and the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, the amygdala, our primal brain, how it's triggered, how it affects other parts of the brain, and then the hormonal system, the
Mhm.
endocrine system. And then what are some small sort of techniques that we can use to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our body that brings us back to that resting, calm, homeostasis, we call it, the resting. So all of our component parts are in a resting state. We're not constantly alert for trauma and crisis, because it can take time for that to recover. And for Indigenous people who have generations of trauma, it's like it's in our blood. We also, but we also have generations and generations of wellness and recovery. And so really my passion is about finding the ways that we can tap into all those strategies, to really nurture ourselves.
Mm.
And so the physiological piece, that's how I got into being a carnivore, because I realized that there I was training about being well and learning how to communicate effectively, and take care of ourselves, and mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. I had all of them down except for the physical one, because there's incongruence between me talking about these things and even showing people how to de-escalate when I'm carrying so much extra weight. What I started in January, and I've lost 50 pounds.
Wow.
And the more I reach my sort of ideal, like the proper weight for me as a 62-year-old woman,
Mhm.
the more congruent I feel. And so yeah, it was in the fall, it was like I know everything that I need to know to live perfectly healthy, because I experimented with um paleo and keto, and I've always been pretty physically active.
Mhm.
So I had to ask myself that question after eating all the Christmas goodies,
Yeah.
being at my peak weight of 250. I had to ask myself, what if I know what everything that it takes to be completely healthy, why am I not putting it into action?
Right.
And I didn't have an answer for myself. And so I was like, okay. And the next day I started. I stopped eating all sugar, all carbohydrates, and all plants. And so I only eat meat and a little bit of dairy,
Really? Wow.
eggs. Yeah, but primarily I eat beef, bison, and a little bit of pork. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And I mean, it's reversed. I was hypertensive. I was pre-diabetic. I was having arthritis was starting to kick in. That's all cleared. And
Wow.
people say I look younger every day. and I feel like fantastic. No, I have no arthritis, no joint pain. All the inflammation, arthritis and all of those things are caused because due to inflammation that we carry in our body. And what the interesting thing about being on carnivore is that you can actually feel the inflammation leave.
Wow.
I remember at about day, I think it was into the second week, I just released water. And you know how you release water, right?
Yes.
When you release a lot more, you notice. And that, that's happened a few times. And yeah, I have no inflammation. So of course, if you're starting to experience arthritis and you retain weight
Yeah.
or you retain water, you feel it in your joints.
Yeah.
And so where it's really was really obvious to me is I flew a lot before the pandemic, and I started getting really, I'd get really puffy,
Mm,
and then that edema would stay in my feet and my hands for sometimes 24 hours.
mm,
And the last two times I flew, nothing, no edema at all. And in fact, I often eat only once a day.
right.
Um, yeah, towards the evening, and I don't feel hungry. My blood sugar is really stable, and brain fog is gone. Blood pressure is normalized. Blood sugar. I mean, if your blood sugar is not stable, you eat.
Oh,
Okay. So,
yeah.
and I was a terrible carb and sugar addict, and looking back, I think as a person who has addiction issues, um, yeah, food was another addiction for me.
Oh, me
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
I get that.
And
I'm a chocoholic, like, ugh.
yeah. Well, you're one of the lucky ones where you look like you're quite slender.
Well,
And unless you kind of go like this. I just can't see it on this.
no, I have heavy thighs, really heavy thighs.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
also a lot of my family, that's the way we're built, you know?
Yeah, and that can run in families too.
Yeah,
And my family, we tend to get like bean bodies, you know? And yeah, like a couple of my sisters are very slender. Two are very slender, but yeah, if they gain any weight, it's like bean bodies. And me too, which is why people are surprised when like right now I'm still at about 200,
okay.
even though it doesn't look like it.
No, it doesn't, no.
No, because I've if I'm yeah, I've always carried more weight. I think I've maybe got those thick cree bones or something. But I've always been heavier than I've looked.
Oh,
So it's really about how I feel. It's not about losing weight. It's about
how you feel.
when you switch from a carb and sugar burning diet to a fat burning diet.
Yeah,
Um, you're no longer spiking insulin because you're not having your pancreas doesn't need to produce it in, as a strategy, as a protective strategy against sugar.
right.
There's too much sugar in our blood, and we can die. So, the high carb, high sugar, high processed foods that we're eating are killing us literally.
Hmm.
And yeah, but you can't really tell people that. I figure I'll just live it by example, and then I told people, like, if you don't recognize me in a few months, that's okay. It's still me, still
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Uh,
But I've always loved renovating in my spare time, and I'm back to doing that again
oh,
for
nice.
for about a year and a half, 2 years, maybe even longer. Denial is such a powerful thing, right?
Yes.
But I just would get fatigued after one little task, and now it's like I can go all day, and I'm pretty tuckered at night, but I have stiff muscles again, and it's like it's so good to move.
Absolutely. I
And
tell this people all
yeah,
the time, like, don't be just sitting around, like, oh my gosh, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Like,
exactly, exactly.
yeah. I just want to touch on the colonial thing ism again for just a second. I was with my
Sure.
sisters yesterday, two of my sisters that live in my area, and I said to them, like, we're colonial, our ancestors were from Europe, right? And I said, do you realize how
Mhm.
colonialized we are? You know, like we are afraid to get rid of our lawns. Why? All these stupid things. And how can we look at indigenous people differently if we're still so in that colonial mindset?
I have lawns. I got front yard. Well, I have two houses and I've got two front yards and two backyards. I only have to take care of the one I live in.
Right?
But yeah, like I would have no problem in transitioning to like natural grasses.
Yeah,
Uh, but it would cost money and time, right? And
certainly.
I'd love for somebody to come in and do that in my front yard and my backyard, create like a little oasis in my backyard,
Yeah.
and then have it so that it's maintenance free.
Yeah.
But to transition from grass to that, it'd be
Mm.
like, oh my goodness, have to put down that weed barrier and then
Yeah, I
whatever it
know.
is you need and plant your little grasses
Yeah.
and if it was a high maintenance thing, it'd be
Well,
yeah,
I live in a condo and we pay somebody to come and mow the lawn and do the weeding. And I'm thinking, with that money that we could save, not paying him to do that, we could change our grounds, But
it's true. Yeah,
un- unfortunately, most people don't think that way. So it's really difficult to,
yeah.
talk to counsel about it. And it's like, okay, forget it because I'll end up wanting to fight with them.
I know there's something I was raised, in the suburbs. I was raised in a very privileged environment. So we always had yards and lawns, and my dad was very diligent about getting out there and getting the dandelions out and keeping, fertilizing it. So it was always very lush and green and, like perfect edges and stuff. And so there's something about that I find appealing. And particularly in the area that I live in, it's like everybody's got big lawns and so when someone doesn't take care of it, it sort of sticks out like a sore thumb.
It does.
We get all judgy, like,
Lawns.
look at their
Lawns,
lawn.
a manicured lawn does look nice. I mean, there's no two ways
But there
about it,
are,
right?
well, I think it only looks nice because we've been socialized to believe it looks nice.
Exactly.
Other, somebody coming from an alien coming from another planet might go, what's this? And, inspect the grasses like Kentucky bluegrass. What's this doing here? And when it's supposed to be in Kentucky, and where are all the natural plants that just kind of grow here? And
Yeah,
so I've seen people moving to that more natural grasses and rocks and little fountains and stuff. And if it's done right, it can look really, really great.
yeah,
Others I've seen, it just looks scruffy, right? And
yeah,
and I get judged enough. I don't need to be judged on my scruffy yard. So I work to keep it, just kind of with the status quo, which is really, I mean, I feel kind of embarrassed to say that, but right now I've got other things to focus on.
you have to set your priorities, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
where
that's
your
for sure.
energy, yeah, and where your energy is going to go. Another thing, it'll be airing this week. I did an interview with a couple of people, and we talked about childhood trauma. We were
Mhm.
sexually abused, but that
Yeah,
trauma,
yeah.
when you mention trauma, what it does to the body is unbelievable, right?
Adverse childhood experiences. They call it ACE. Yeah, lots of literature on that these days, and what it does to the body. Yeah, it. So one of the first things that intrigued me was learning about cortisol. So cortisol is a natural hormone. So our amygdala is alerted and it alerts sort of our entire system to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn,
Okay.
depending on the situation, right? If there's suddenly an earthquake, freezing is a good thing to do. And or if the road is caving in front of you, fleeing is a good flight is a good thing to do. Or if somebody's, a big bear is coming at you, it's like flee behind the nearest tree. If it's, I mean, actually, you're supposed to stand and get really big, but
Yeah, yeah,
who knows what's going to happen in those moments. But so cortisol is really, really important. But the problem is that with some of these mechanisms that put us into high gear, they put our body into high gear. They, for example, our capillaries shrink in our extremities in order to preserve blood and oxygen flow to our vital organs.
okay.
Initially, we do get an increased blood flow and oxygen flow. Our lungs, our capillaries in our lungs open up to get more oxygen, so that if we are fleeing, that we can sustain that for a little bit. Being a long distance runner, of course, would help.
Yeah.
if you're if you sit on your butt and are way overweight, then it's not going to do a whole lot of good. But the problem is that some of these mechanisms don't have a shut off switch. And or if it happens in children, uh, the 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 effects can be permanent or close to permanent. So that's very, very difficult then for children of trauma to then first of all relearn physiologically how to be in homeostasis
Right,
and how to reduce cortisol levels.
right,
So there were some studies done in there was a group of psychiatrists in New York who were studying Holocaust survivors, and they, in discussion with each other, they discovered that they were observing, sorry, not Holocaust direct survivors, but intergenerational survivors of the Holocaust.
right.
And what they were observing is that the survivors were, even though they didn't know each other, they were exhibiting very similar symptoms.
Ah, yeah,
So
okay.
they decided to do a study and bring many of these survivors into this study, and they took their blood and they measured everything. And what they noticed was in intergenerational survivors of the Holocaust, so they had not been in even in Germany necessarily,
Right.
that they had compared to the rest of the population, they had a significantly heightened level of cortisol. And another similar study in just after 9/11 happened. They did a study with women who were pregnant and found that they're pregnant during that time period. Their babies also had elevated levels of cortisol that sustained over time.
Okay.
And so, that's pretty significant because cortisol, elevated level of cortisol is linked to all kinds of chronic diseases, hypertension, high blood pressure, coronary disease, that you
Right.
name it.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
And I remember reading a study about that racism is linked to, that belly fat. So people who experience race-based sort of trauma over time,
okay.
um, the mechanisms in the body, especially if you only eat a carb diet, then there's a tendency for, yeah, that tire,
Yes, I
that
know
belly,
exactly what you mean.
the muffin top,
Yeah.
yeah. And so when you look at the preponderance of obesity in our communities and where it's carried, it's like, yes, this makes sense. This makes sense.
Wow.
Um, and for me, my muffin top's gone from a triple X to probably between medium and large.
Okay, that's cool.
And at some point, it's going to be gone. Uh,
Yes. Right.
and in that process,
Mm.
what I experienced is that I came face to face with what it was, the emotional issues that were leading me to seek comfort in food intake and the types of foods that I chose: chocolate, muffins, cookies, chips,
Right.
pop, all of those sorts of things. And it was pure unadulterated rage.
Ah.
And so what I did was I just went out in my truck and I did some primal scream therapy, and I just let her rip. And like I cried and raged and screamed and used all kinds of fancy swear words and combinations of swear words, and just just let her rip.
Right.
And it was interesting how that really calmed me.
Oh,
And
wow.
that calm I've had to do it a couple more times. Every now and then it's like if I feel a little bit ragey, I'll just go for a little drive and just let her rip.
It's just so cool.
And it always requires me to cry because grief underpins all rage and anger, right? So
Yeah,
you have to let that out.
for sure.
um but people say I'm much more calm and focused. And
Mm. Yeah.
yeah, I think as intergenerational survivors and a survivor of adverse childhood experiences, I have a few things to be rageful about. um but it's good we have these built-in mechanisms to release those things, to cathartic those painful emotions and so on. And we need to take advantage of them. None
Yeah.
of this, be stoic and be tough and strong. It's like it's where we find strength is in releasing those traumas and crying crying, raging and crying and crying and raging and saying, you know what, I'm okay despite all that. Yeah, I didn't deserve that. I didn't ask for it. It happened. And I'm really pissed off and I'm really sad and I'm going to cry about it. And then I'm going to get on with my day. And it's like when I'm ready.
Right. I'm gonna have to end it there because I just got to notice we're running out of time.
Oh no. We
Yeah,
just
so I think
started. We just started, Nancy.
I know what we're gonna just have to book another interview. That's
I
all.
guess so. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Just
thanks so much for the invite. It's a pleasure.
oh, thank you for
Yeah,
accepting. Just stay on camera for a second. To the
sure.
audience, you've been
Yeah.
listening to Raven Sinclair, and I'm definitely going to have her back on the show. In the meantime, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you continue to do so. Take care and peace out.